Niger, Burkina, and Mali have an amazing endowment of uranium, of lithium, of manganese, and of gold. When people talk about critical minerals, these four are among those that are mentioned. These are not poor countries, but there are countries where people are poor because even the governance of those resources right now still is not with those three countries. You need a central authority, and this is what they are working towards establishing, because you can have a government in power, but if they do not have the authority on the entire territory, some of the issues that we discuss cannot be handled easily.
I would tend to argue that one of the reasons why the Sahel turned to the Russians is because they provided, for better or for worse, in this case for worse, an alternative promise of security.
The speech you just watched unfolded during a fiery exchange at the Munich Security Conference, where global powers grappled with the unfolding realities in the Sahel, particularly Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger. As a Western journalist attempted to paint these three proud Sahelian nations in a negative light, dismissing their sovereign choices and resilience, our sister, Otilia Anna Maunganidze from South Africa, rose with unapologetic clarity and delivered a powerful continent-resonating response.
Mr. President, after years of strained relations, how can the EU and African countries now rebuild ties with Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger?
We've not had a strained relationship with these countries. I've been to two of those countries on a couple of occasions to engage them, because as a young military officer, I inherited a situation that's similar to what they have today. So, but of course, geopolitics and other factors beyond our region are actually driving that situation. And so if we have to re-engage them, I have maintained a bridge. I was in Burkina Faso. I've been to Burkina Faso twice to engage the leadership. I've been to Mali. I've not been to Niger. So I have a bridge across which I can actually walk comfortably to engage them. I know their situation. I know their fears. And but what actually drove them, to leave the ECOWAS community is totally different. And I want to encourage them, and I'm trying to encourage them to know that, as we have rightly characterized, that conflict is beyond their means, not even West Africa alone, and a practical approach to that, a pragmatic approach to that will be to engage all their neighbors, including Mauritania, Algeria. We in the sub-region, the Europeans have been making effort to join us, but they need a platform, and we are trying to have a strategy that we encompass the concerns of all of the partners that are interested in resolving that conflict. So I believe that they should, to my colleagues in the three countries, to have a world view, to understand where the world is going. It is in a state of flux, as you all know. Things are happening so quickly and so fast, and we have over 400 million citizens in West Africa that need socio-economic development. So we don't want to be bogged down by just one situation. They should also make the effort, and as we are making effort to engage them, they should be receptive to what we are proposing to them, because it is in our general interest in the sub-region, not only to resolve this, but also the benefits to like economic integration across West Africa. 470 million, that is a sober market for us to use as the basis for going forward. So we are very much poised. We won't give up on them. We hope that they can understand. And we also, as we try to engage, we should bear in mind the fact that we don't go and think that the old order of doing things, we should bear in mind the political realities of today, which should actually define our relationship with these countries.
Thank you. Ambassador, can you walk us a little bit through the key elements of the EU's new approach, and maybe with a reference to what you already mentioned about Russia and Russia's narrative?
Well, okay, thank you very much for that. So, effectively, in end of November, we, at the level of the European Union foreign ministers, adopted the so-called renewed approach. The renewed approach is based on three elements. The first is intensified political and diplomatic engagement. Now, that might sound like the vacuous conversation of diplomats without any real meaning. It isn't actually. The nature of our conversation has been a fundamental problem in the relations between us and the region, and we need to correct that. We need to be a lot better at listening. We need to be a lot better at explaining where we're coming from and explaining that we have a number of interests. We're not there just because we like to be nice neighbors. We're there because we have concerns, and that has been very well received. I was in Niger about 3 weeks ago, earlier this week in Burkina, next week in Mali. It's been extremely well received. Secondly, human security. 3 military regimes came to power saying there's a security problem, we're military, we know how to deal with it. Now they're all saying actually the problem is much more than military. We need to have an integrated approach. Sarah Jacobs was talking about this as well, and President Bio. And this is, I think, recognized. Our suggestion is, okay, let's work together with you on community-based justice, on issues that are responding to access to basic social services. This is what stops people from joining, being recruited into the ranks of terrorist groups. And thirdly, socioeconomic resilience, creation of employment opportunities, infrastructuring, small access roads so that people can get produce to market. So these three elements, political diplomatic engagement, human security, and socioeconomic resilience, I think give us a lot to work on. I'm happy to spend the next hour, but I don't want to abuse. I would love another moment if there is a chance to come back to Russia, though.
We will come back to Russia, but let's to the US. Listening to what the EU is planning, what, in your point of view, should US policy be in the Sahel going forward? Or how does Congress plan to engage with this issue? Can you share a little bit?
Sure. So, I think in order to think about what we need to do going forward, we really need to reckon with the failures of our past approach. In a lot of these countries, the U.S. would go in, we would train an elite special forces unit often, because our own system is so mismatched in terms of how much resources our Department of Defense gets versus our diplomacy and our development. We would put in a lot of resources to the military side without any of the requisite sort of governance approaches. And then we were surprised when all of a sudden that mismatch that we exported turned into coups. And so I think it's important that we first recognize the role we played and the problems and failures with our strategy to this point. And then, moving forward, I think it's about maintaining relations. I think we should have diplomatic relations with everybody. It's about understanding what partnership really looks like and means. I appreciate the three sort of areas that the EU is focused on. I think it's partially about us recognizing that at this moment, it feels very hard for us to go into other countries and lecture them about human rights and how they should be respecting their populations when we see what's happening both within the United States and among our allies. And I think it's also about not just letting the fact that Russia is there dictate that the United States needs to engage in a certain way. I think too often we think that we have to engage in a certain way because Russia or China is there, and I think that actually leads our foreign policy in a really dangerous direction. But I will say to President Bio's point that this is a broader regional challenge. I'm really proud that the U.S. Congress passed the Global Fragility Act, which is a sort of new strategic approach, whole of government, to how the U.S. is going to engage. And coastal West Africa is one of our key starting regions because we know that we need to help shore up the coastal West African states as they are facing this pressure coming from the north.
Thank you. Minister, from your point of view, and I know you have been very engaged with terrorist questions, what are the prospects of reintegrating the Sahel countries into regional organizations and initiatives? What's your point of view about that?
I think that the integration, well, it has already been mentioned by the President, by His Excellency the President. But first of all, it's a question of trust. We need to to get back this trust and confidence between the different partners and the countries. We need a technical cooperation, and this must continue. We also need to have a partnership which must be visible at an economic level. And we also need security dialogue, and this needs to be pragmatic. And I think all of that will benefit trust, and I think it's really important. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. So when we talk about the Russian influence in the Sahel, I think it's very important to say to our Sahelian friends, we are interested in Sahel because of the Sahel. We're not just interested because we have a geopolitical competition going on with Russia. However, this geopolitical competition is a large part of the reason why Russia is there. Russia is there because it is interested in establishing itself in what it sees as the soft underbelly of NATO. And I'm very concerned that as Russia, when it establishes eventually some willingness to go to the table to reach some kind of settlement with respect to its invasion of Ukraine, Russia will still remain Russia. And Russia will still remain interested in having leverage, in having the capacity to disturb the peace in the southern flank of NATO, the southern Europe. And therefore, it will have enormous excess capacity of people that it does not want back in its towns and villages, people who were already criminals before they went and are now battle-hardened. And these people, it's going to be only too happy to send down to the Sahel. So whereas today we have 2,000 Russians in Mali, I suspect that we could easily have 20,000 there. And their capacity to, together with Russia's investment in disinformation, can seriously destabilize unless we manage to work with the Sahelians very well over the next months and years. We need to reconquer their trust, and in order to do so, we need to refashion our approach. We have the instruments, though, to do this, though.
Thank you. I now look to the audience.
I would tend to argue that one of the reasons why the Sahel turned to the Russians is because they provided, for better or for worse, in this case for worse, an alternative promise of security. Europe needs to invest in the provision of security. Without security, nothing else is possible. And I think that that essential reality, given the structural causes, remains true. It may not be a reality we like, but I think it is absolutely imperative.
Thank you. And do you have a question to anybody in the panel how we can, well, make progress in security and providing security?
It means that Europe must be prepared to provide hard security support to the government, including training, provision of arms. There is no other way. There is also other strategies that need to be adopted, working with religious leaders and so on and so forth, to deal with the promise that radical Islam presents in the region. But that's a different. Those are ancillary strategies to the essential need to focus on the provision of security to the government if Europe wants to play a meaningful role. It's not a pleasant message. I'm fully aware of that.
Ottilia, I see you, 2 fingers, and Sarah, please.
Brief, and it's really, thank you so much, Ambassador Kandil, for your remarks, particularly around governance. I think if there can be 2 elephants in a room, there are 2 elephants in the room that we haven't quite touched on. You touched on the first, which relates to the authority of the state in all of its territory, and the need. Even we can have a conversation around, as the President alluded to, around the 3 Sahelian states rejoining ECOWAS. But when you look at the need even to establish a trilateral arrangement through the Alliance of Sahelian States, that was built in a recognition that perhaps individually we're not strong enough to deal with and to counter some of these issues, right? But recognizing that the region, for them, still matters. And I say this because if you look at the expanse of Niger and Mali in particular, even when they were dealing with some of the issues around smuggling or trafficking of persons, right, what was happening in Niamey versus what was happening in Agadez was different. You need a central authority, and this is what they are working towards establishing, because you can have a government in power, but if they do not have the authority on the entire territory, some of the issues that we discuss cannot be handled easily. And I think we have to recognize that. The other one is a very brief elephant in the room. Niger, Burkina, and Mali have an amazing endowment of uranium, of lithium, of manganese, and of gold. When people talk about critical minerals, these 4 are among those that are mentioned. These are not poor countries, but they are countries where people are poor because even the governance of those resources right now